What happens when the most powerful woman in aviation, quiet, composed, carrying nothing more than a paperback novel, steps onto a flight and is told she doesn't belong in her own seat? What happens when arrogance collides with calm strength at 30,000 feet, and the world is forced to watch? On Flight 417, Dr. Amara Lewis, the black CEO of a global aviation empire, was asked to surrender her place for a louder, entitled passenger. The humiliation should have ended there. But instead, it ignited a chain reaction no one could have predicted. Within minutes, one woman's decision would ground an entire fleet, shake Wall Street, and rewrite the rules of respect for millions of travelers. Was she reckless, or was she rewriting history? Did she cross a line or draw the first honest boundary in decades? And most of all, what does dignity cost? And who decides its price? Stay with us, because this is more than a story about a flight. It's a story about power, silence, and the moment one person stood up by refusing to stand down. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the stories that reveal the truths hiding in plain sight. The first-class cabin of Horizon Atlantic Flight 472 carried an air of hushed anticipation. Boarding had just completed at Gate 19 in San Francisco, and the crew moved with brisk efficiency, checking latches, closing overhead bins, offering pre-departure beverages. Outside, the late afternoon sun broke through a layer of fog, washing the tarmac in a golden haze. Passengers scrolled their phones, adjusted their seatbelts, and prepared for the 6-hour flight to New York. Among them sat Dr. Amara Lewis. To anyone glancing casually, she looked like just another business traveler: navy sweater, charcoal slacks, a worn leather tote bag, and a paperback novel she kept tucked under her arm. No entourage, no jewelry screaming status, no outward sign that she was one of the most influential women in aviation technology. She sank gently into seat 2A, the window seat, and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the soft hum of the aircraft surround her. For once, she wasn't the CEO, strategist, or negotiator. She was simply a passenger who longed for quiet, a few stolen hours to reflect. She had chosen this route under her booking name, Lewis, deliberately avoiding her full title. She wanted to see how her own airline subsidiary, Horizon Atlantic Elite, treated its passengers when no one knew the weight her name carried. The cabin smelled faintly of citrus cleaner mixed with the subtle fragrance of fresh linens. Flight attendants moved down the aisle, smiling, distributing champagne flutes. Across the row, a real estate magnate she vaguely recognized from business magazines nodded politely. In 2B, the aisle seat beside her, a young law student nervously tapped at her laptop, clearly rehearsing notes for an upcoming interview. Amara felt a sense of peace. She hadn't had more than 3 consecutive days away from the demands of her company in over 2 years. This trip, at least at first, was not about boardrooms or negotiations. It was about sitting still, breathing, and remembering what it meant to simply be human. But peace on airplanes rarely lasts. The disruption arrived in the form of a man whose voice preceded him. Trent Maxwell, dressed in a blinding white hoodie with gold lettering, strode into the cabin like it belonged to him. His sneakers gleamed, and his wristwatch massive. Diamond-studded flashed like a strobe light every time he gestured. Clinging to his arm was Chloe Rivera, her long hair perfectly waved, her expression one of perpetual disapproval. "Babe, this is weak," Chloe muttered loudly, her tone cutting through the cabin's calm. "I told you Horizon Elite would be disappointing. Look at this plane. Small, outdated, and the champagne. Please." Trent grinned, not at her, but at the passengers within earshot. Don't worry, babe. I'll fix it. I always do. The flight attendant at the front, Brenda Collins, glanced toward them. She had the look of someone both intimidated and eager to please. With quick steps, she guided them toward the second row, Amara's row. Trent paused, scanning the seats. His eyes landed on 2A. That's mine, he declared, not even glancing at his boarding pass. Brenda hesitated, shifting awkwardly. Mr. Maxwell, I believe you're in 3A, just behind this row. Seat 2A is occupied. Trent frowned as though the universe itself had betrayed him. No. Babe, tell her. You know I don't do back row. That's my seat, Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. Yeah, move her. Obviously. This lady doesn't need the window. She's, what? Reading a paperback. Probably a frequent flyer free upgrade. Do you want to risk upsetting Trent before his event in New York? Brenda's eyes flicked nervously toward Amara. In her simple sweater and quiet demeanor, Amara looked nothing like the wealthy tech executives who usually occupied the front cabin. Brenda made a calculation, an unconscious, biased one. The louder, flashier passenger must be the VIP. Excuse me, ma'am, Brenda said, leaning slightly toward Amara. Could I ask you to switch seats for this flight? Mr. Maxwell is one of our priority clients, and we'd like to make sure he's comfortable. Amara slowly lifted her gaze from her book. Her eyes, calm but sharp, met Brenda's. I'm sorry, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of both politeness and steel. This is my assigned seat. For a brief second, Brenda faltered. She hadn't expected quiet resistance. She tried again. We can offer you generous compensation. A voucher. Hotel arrangements in New York if needed. We'd just like to resolve this smoothly. Trent leaned in, towering over Amara, using his physical presence like a weapon. Lady, do you know who I am? I've got a multi-million-dollar deal waiting in Manhattan. My time is money. Yours. He smirked. You're sitting here with a novel. Let's be real. You don't belong in 2A. The cabin shifted. Other passengers, sensing the drama, angled their heads to watch. The young law student in 2B froze, wide-eyed, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. The real estate magnate across the aisle lowered his newspaper, his jaw tightening. Amara inhaled slowly, internally. A battle stirred. Part of her wanted to end the charade immediately to reveal her identity, her authority, the empire she had built. But another part, the wiser part, whispered that this moment was bigger than her ego. It was about principle, about holding up a mirror to a system that too often rewarded arrogance and punished quiet dignity. She turned another page in her book, deliberately calm. I'm afraid I must decline, she said, her voice as steady as the hum of the engines outside. Trent scoffed. Chloe rolled her eyes dramatically. Brenda shifted her weight, clearly flustered. Ma'am, please, Mr. Maxwell's a VIP. Amara closed her book gently and set it on the armrest. Brenda, she said, reading the name tag with deliberate clarity. On what basis are you calling him a VIP? His ticket, his travel record, or simply his volume? A ripple of suppressed laughter moved through the cabin. Even the captain's voice crackled briefly from the intercom before cutting out, as if the tension had reached the cockpit. Brenda's face flushed. It's company policy. We prioritize our valued clients, and you determined his value by... Amara let the question hang, sharp but quiet. She didn't need to raise her voice. The weight of logic was enough. Trent leaned closer, his breath hot with irritation. Look, I don't care who you are. You're moving, or I'll make sure security moves you. The law student beside her whispered nervously. You don't have to take this. Should I record? Amara placed a calming hand on the armrest between them. Not yet, she whispered back, her eyes still fixed on Brenda. Inside. Amara's thoughts churned. Every instinct screamed that this was her moment to act, to protect not only herself, but everyone who had ever been quietly erased in the name of VIP service. Yet she also knew the cost of escalation. A wrong move could spiral, could hurt innocence, could damage the very company she had built. She exhaled, long and slow. The storm was coming, and she would meet it with the same weapon she always carried: calm, unshakable resolve. The seatbelt signs above flickered. The engines roared louder as the aircraft prepared to push back. But inside the cabin, time seemed to stall. Everyone waited for the quiet woman in 2A to decide whether to yield or to fight. She had already decided. This battle wouldn't be won with shouting. It would be won with truth. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight attendants made their final checks. But the tension in row 2 only grew sharper. Brenda Collins stood rigid in the aisle, her hands tightening around the digital manifest tablet. She knew the passengers were watching, judging, but she had already made her calculation. To her, Trent Maxwell looked like money. Dr. Amara Lewis looked like inconvenience. And when money and inconvenience collide, company culture had long dictated that money wins. Trent leaned back against his seat, not the one assigned to him, but the aisle edge of 2B, looming over Amara as though his physical presence alone could shove her into surrender. Chloe Rivera sat perched behind him, phone in hand, clearly ready to broadcast the drama if it served her image. "Brenda," Chloe said loudly, her eyes darting toward the nearby passengers. "This is embarrassing. How can you let some nobody block my fiancé from sitting where he belongs?" The word nobody struck like a blade. Amara felt it land, not because she had any doubt about who she was, but because of how easily it was said, how comfortably Chloe assumed that dismissing another human being could win her what she wanted. Amara had heard variations of that word her entire life, spoken in different rooms, in different tones, each time rooted in the same diseased prejudice mixed with arrogance. Still, she remained composed. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Her silence a wall Trent's bluster could not climb. "Ma'am," Brenda pressed again, lowering her voice now as though offering mercy. "We'll take good care of you. A voucher. Hotel. Maybe even a free upgrade next time. Just let him have the seat. It will avoid complications." Amara tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Avoid complications for whom she asked softly. The question cut deeper than a shout ever could. Brenda's lips parted, then closed. She had no answer, only instinct. She wanted quiet compliance. She wanted the easy path. But Amara's calm refusal forced her to see the cowardice in that desire. Across the aisle, Dr. Elena Park, a pediatric surgeon traveling east for a conference, leaned forward, her eyes, dark and sharp, followed the exchange with a surgeon's precision. She had seen this before, not on airplanes, but in operating rooms, board meetings, and faculty lounges. The erasure of women, especially women of color, disguised as practicality. She shifted, considering whether to speak, but Amara's composure held her in check. There was power in watching, in letting this quiet passenger lead her own defense. The law student in 2B fidgeted nervously, clearly caught between awe and fear. She had whispered to Amara earlier, offering to record the interaction. Now she sat frozen, eyes darting between Brenda and Trent, her fingers clutching the edges of her laptop as if it were a lifeline. Trent exhaled loudly, slapping the headrest in front of him. "This is ridiculous. I'm not missing my deal in Manhattan because some stubborn lady thinks she has rights. She doesn't. Get your manager, Brenda. Or better, get security. The words hung heavy. Passengers stiffened. The mention of security in an airplane cabin carried a weight that everyone understood. Too often, those encounters ended badly, sometimes violently, always with consequences that reached far beyond a delayed departure. Amara's pulse quickened, but she did not move. She had known this moment might come. She had prepared for it in ways no one around her could guess. Brenda swallowed hard. She was tempted. Security could solve the problem quickly, decisively. But in the back of her mind, a flicker of unease stirred. Something about Amara's gaze unsettled her. It wasn't defiance or fear. It was patience, as if she had already seen the end of this story and was simply waiting for the others to catch up. The aircraft door thudded shut. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, cheerful, oblivious. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Horizon Atlantic Flight 472 to New York City. Our flight time this evening is approximately 5 hours and 40 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the service. The irony was suffocating. No one in row 2 was relaxed. Martin Hale, the station manager, appeared at the front of the cabin minutes later, summoned by Brenda's discreet message through her tablet. He wore a crisp navy suit that fit just a little too snug, his Bluetooth earpiece blinking as he juggled a flurry of pre-departure calls. His eyes scanned the cabin, quickly landing on Amara. He saw her sweater, her paperback, her quiet posture. His mind leapt to the same lazy conclusion Brenda's had not important. Then he looked at Trent, who by now had sprawled into the aisle, chest puffed, watch flashing. Important, or at least loud enough to appear so. "Good evening," Martin said, his tone heavy with false calm. "We have a small seating issue here. Miss—" He trailed off, waiting for Amara to supply her name. "Lewis," she said evenly. "Yes, Miss Lewis. We'll need your cooperation. This seat will need to be reassigned." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Passengers knew what was happening, had seen versions of it before. The quiet one was asked to move. The loud one was appeased. Order was restored, but at a cost. Most would sigh, shake their heads, and return to their reading. But not today. Not with Amara. She leaned slightly forward, her voice clear but controlled. "Mr. Hale, may I ask on what authority you are removing a confirmed passenger from her assigned seat?" Martin blinked. He hadn't expected resistance framed as a question. He tried to recover. "It's company discretion. We prioritize our key clients. Mr. Maxwell here," as Amara cut in gently, almost kindly. "And what metrics do you use to define a key client flight frequency revenue contribution? Or does volume of complaints suffice?" A faint chuckle escaped from the row behind, quickly stifled. Even Dr. Park allowed the corner of her mouth to twitch upward. Martin flushed, unused to being challenged so directly in front of customers. "Ma'am, this isn't personal. It's just business priorities." Amara's lips curved, but her eyes hardened. Business priorities. She let the phrase hang in the air, tasting the hollowness of it. Her company had been built on precision, data, and integrity. To hear her own airline use such flimsy logic as justification for bias sparked a quiet fury deep in her chest. Trent seized the opening. "Exactly. Business priorities. My deal tonight is worth more than her little vacation. So unless you want me to make some calls that you'll regret, I suggest you get her off this plane." The word vacation stung, not because it was true, but because of the assumption behind it, that her time, her purpose, her existence, was somehow smaller. Amara drew a slow breath, steadying the storm inside her. This was the breaking point. Either she yielded and became invisible, or she stood her ground and revealed everything. She turned slightly toward the window, gazing at the fading sunlight streaking the runway. For a heartbeat, she was a child again, sitting on the back porch with her father, who had once told her, "People will try to measure you with their eyes. Let them. Their rulers are broken." She carried that lesson now, heavier than her leather tote, sharper than any retort. Her phone buzzed quietly in her bag. She knew without looking it was Ethan Joe, her COO, checking in before his own late flight. She let it buzz. She wasn't ready yet, not until Brenda, Martin, and Trent had fully shown their cards. When she finally turned back, her voice was calm, but laced with steel. "Mr. Hale, Brenda, Mr. Maxwell, you've made your decisions. Now I'll make mine." She reached into her tote and pulled out her phone. Martin groaned audibly, mistaking her intent. "Ma'am, please don't make a scene by recording. That won't help anyone." Amara's thumb glided across the screen, not to the camera, but to her secure contacts. Her mind was made up. Enough was enough. This was no longer about a seat. It was about the system, and she was prepared to tear that system down to its bones if that's what it took. Passengers leaned in. The hum of the engines deepened as the aircraft taxied slowly away from the gate. But in row 2, no one was thinking of altitude or destinations. All eyes were on the quiet woman in 2A, the one they had underestimated, the one who had yet to show her full hand. Amara pressed call. The line rang once. A familiar voice answered immediately. "Amara, I thought you were offline." Her eyes met Martin's, steady and unblinking. "Change of plans. Ethan," she said. "We have a serious problem. I need you to do 3 things. Now, the cabin, already tense, shifted into something electric." Everyone knew they were no longer watching a petty seat dispute. They were witnessing the opening act of something far larger. And Amara Lewis was about to rewrite the rules at 35,000 feet. The engines droned louder as the aircraft edged toward the runway. Passengers adjusted their seatbacks. Flight attendants moved briskly through the aisles, but all attention kept snapping back to row 2. "Dr. Amara Lewis." Phone pressed lightly against her ear, spoke in a measured tone that carried more gravity than raised voices ever could. "Ethan," she said, "pause all Aurora Atlantic West Coast departures. Immediately. I want fleet control frozen until further notice." On the other end of the line, Ethan Joe did not waste time with questions. His voice was steady, clipped, efficient, understood. "I'll initiate protocol now. Estimated time for full halt, 12 minutes. Passengers nearby heard just enough to realize something unusual was unfolding. A murmur passed down the cabin like an invisible current. Was this woman truly serious? Could she, with a single phone call, stop flights across the entire region? Martin Hale frowned, sweat beading along his temples. He leaned closer, trying to intimidate with authority. "Ma'am, whatever stunt you're attempting is highly inappropriate. We need this phone call to end right now." Amara lowered the device slightly, her gaze unflinching. "Mr. Hale, you've made repeated references to company policy and business priorities. Let me clarify something for you. I set those priorities, and you're about to learn why words like dignity, equity, and accountability are not optional." Her voice did not rise, yet its calm force sliced through the air like steel through silk. Brenda Collins shifted uneasily. The lines around her eyes deepened as she studied Amara again, as if seeing her for the first time. Could it be true? Could this quiet passenger actually wield the kind of power that determined whether flights took off or sat grounded on the tarmac? Trent Maxwell scoffed, trying to mask his sudden unease. "You've got to be kidding me. This is some kind of act. She's bluffing. Nobody cancels flights because of a seat mix-up." He laughed, high-pitched and hollow. Chloe Rivera, usually quick with sharp commentary, pressed her lips together instead, her phone lowering as if even she doubted the stability of the moment. The law student beside Amara whispered again, her voice trembling. "Who are you?" It was not accusation, but awe. She had seen powerful people in news stories, in glossy profiles, but never sitting inches away with a paperback novel in one hand and the power to freeze an airline in the other. Amara's eyes softened as she met the student's gaze. "Someone who refuses to be invisible," she said gently. Then she returned her focus to the call. "Ethan, once control confirms the freeze, connect me directly to Operations Command. I'll give further instructions." Passengers leaned back, startled, whispering into their phones, some discreetly filming. The tension became almost unbearable. This was no longer about Trent Maxwell's ego. It was about the revelation of who truly commanded authority in that cabin. The captain's voice broke through the intercom again. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff." But before the aircraft could accelerate, a sharp chime sounded through the communication system. Brenda's tablet lit up with a red-coded alert she had never seen in her career. "Ground control. Priority override. All West Coast Horizon Atlantic flights, including theirs, were placed on immediate taxi hold." Brenda's jaw dropped. She looked at Martin, who snatched the tablet. Scrolling frantically, his voice trembled. "This can't be. It's impossible." But it wasn't impossible. It was happening. In airports from Los Angeles to Portland, boarding gates froze. Pilots received orders to stand down. Passengers fidgeted restlessly as captains explained unforeseen operational adjustments. The networks of an entire airline bent under the will of one woman seated quietly in 2A. Amara ended the call and set her phone face down on the tray table. She folded her hands once more, the very picture of serenity. "Now," she said softly, "shall we continue this discussion about company policy?" Trent's face had lost its color. He tried to recover his swagger, but the cracks were visible. "So what? You've got connections. Big deal. Doesn't change the fact that I'm sitting in this seat." "You're standing in the aisle of my row," Amara corrected evenly. "And you've mistaken volume for value." The word struck with surgical precision. The real estate magnate across the aisle nodded slightly, murmuring, "Well said." Dr. Park's eyes gleamed with restrained approval. Even the young law student straightened, inspired by the courage she witnessed. Martin Hale attempted to salvage control. He raised his voice, desperate. "Passengers, please remain calm. There is no cause for alarm. We're addressing a minor issue," and Amara's gaze fixed on him, steady and quiet. "Mr. Hale, you've embarrassed yourself enough. Step aside before you compound the damage." He froze, caught between pride and fear. Brenda touched his arm, whispering urgently, "Martin, listen to her. Look at the tablet. She has clearance we've never seen before." The truth sank in. The uniformed supervisor who had strutted aboard minutes earlier now looked smaller, diminished. For the first time, he realized that the woman he had underestimated held the fate of his career in her calm, deliberate hands. Amara turned to Brenda. This is not about you versus me. It's about the culture you choose to embody. When you looked at me, what did you see? Someone unworthy of respect. Someone less valuable than a man with a loud watch. That choice has consequences. Not because I am powerful, but because every passenger deserves better. Brenda's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the words died before they could leave. She saw, with sudden painful clarity, that Amara was right. She had judged by appearances, by noise, by arrogance, and in doing so, she had betrayed the very code she once promised to uphold. Trent could not stay silent. This is insane. You're all going to regret siding with her. I have influence. I have investors. Chloe cut him off, her voice low, trembling with an unfamiliar note of fear. Trent, stop. She stared at Amara, her phone still in her lap. She's not bluffing. The cabin grew quiet again. Passengers sat still, riveted. The air seemed thicker, the hum of the engines louder, as though the plane itself was holding its breath. Amara leaned back in her seat, reclaiming the calm that had been threatened minutes earlier. She reached for her paperback once more, opening it to the page where she had left off before the storm began. She did not need to shout or argue. The power dynamic had already shifted. Everyone in the cabin knew it, yet inside her chest, Amara felt the familiar ache. She had not wanted this. She had hoped for silence, for a few hours of anonymity, but life had once again reminded her she could not be invisible, not when systems of bias thrived in the shadows. Her responsibility was heavier than personal comfort, and so, even at 35,000 feet, she would carry it. The captain's voice returned, uneasy now. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received updated instructions from ground control. We will be holding position temporarily. We appreciate your patience. His words were calm, but his tone betrayed confusion. He, too, was realizing that something extraordinary had unfolded, something beyond routine operational delays. Amara glanced at the law student beside her. Sometimes, she whispered, the only way to prove your worth isn't negotiable, is to let others see what happens when they doubt it. The student swallowed hard, nodding, her eyes wide. She would remember this lesson forever. Trent slumped into the seat behind, his bravado collapsing like a poorly built tower. Chloe leaned away from him, her eyes fixed on the window, silent now, as though ashamed to be aligned with his arrogance. Amara returned to her reading, though she barely absorbed the words. Her mind replayed her father's voice, her mentors, the faces of countless colleagues who had endured smaller humiliations every day without the power to resist. She carried them with her, each one a reminder that justice was not a personal luxury, but a collective necessity. And though the engines remained idle, everyone in that cabin knew the flight path had already changed. The cabin lights flickered softly as the aircraft remained frozen on the taxiway. The silence carried weight, heavier than the engines that had gone quiet outside. For passengers accustomed to efficiency, to seamless service, the sudden halt felt like a rupture in reality. But all eyes were still trained on row 2, where the quiet woman with braids and a book sat like the eye of a storm. Amara Lewis kept her posture calm, one hand resting on the paperback open across her lap. She had not spoken since the call ended, yet the aura surrounding her had shifted. She no longer looked like a passenger politely requesting fairness. She looked like someone who commanded the air itself. Martin Hale paced a few steps down the aisle, the weight of his authority collapsing beneath him. He tried to maintain the illusion of command, but his voice betrayed cracks. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no cause for alarm. This delay is temporary. Horizon Atlantic values your time, and we will resume shortly. No one believed him. His eyes darted nervously to Brenda Collins, whose tablet was still lit with warning codes and operational freezes. She avoided his gaze, unable to reconcile the routine world she knew with the impossible authority of the woman in 2A. Trent Maxwell slammed his palm against the armrest of the seat he had tried to claim. His voice was sharp, desperate. "This is ridiculous. Do you people not understand? I have business in San Francisco tonight. Deals, partnerships, real money on the line. And you're all just sitting here letting her run this circus." No one applauded his outburst. In fact, several passengers turned toward him with disdain. "Doctor..." Elna Park lowered her magazine, her dark eyes locking on him. "Mr. Maxwell, a child's life depends on my being in an operating room tomorrow morning. Spare us your lecture about real priorities." The words cut through the cabin like a scalpel. Trent faltered, opening his mouth to retort, then closing it again when he realized his audience had turned hostile. Chloe Rivera shifted uncomfortably beside him, her arms crossed. She no longer smirked. Instead, she glanced at Amara, then at her own phone, as if reconsidering what story she wanted to tell the world. Amara finally looked up from her book. She set it gently on the tray table and leaned forward, her voice low but clear enough to carry through the hushed cabin. "You all deserve to know why you're waiting. This isn't turbulence. It isn't weather. It isn't maintenance. This delay is intentional. And it began the moment this airline chose to value volume over integrity." The law student in 2B whispered, almost to herself. "She's really doing it," Amara continued, her gaze sweeping across the rows. "When Mr. Hale and Miss Collins singled me out, they made assumptions. They saw simple clothes, no entourage, a paperback instead of a laptop glowing with spreadsheets. They decided my seat, confirmed and paid, was worth less than the demand of someone louder. That is not policy. That is prejudice, and it is unacceptable." Brenda's face crumpled. Her hands shook as she clutched the tablet tighter. I was only trying to resolve the oversell. I thought..." "You thought wrong," Amara said gently, "but without mercy, and you are not alone in that mistake. The system you work in taught you to make those choices. It rewarded arrogance and punished quiet dignity. I know, because I built the company that owns this airline, and now I will rebuild it again." The words dropped into the cabin with seismic force. Murmurs erupted immediately. Phones lifted discreetly, cameras recording. Martin Hale's face drained of color. "What? What did you just say?" Amara reached into her bag, pulling out her ID wallet. She placed a sleek black card on the tray table, embossed not with a passenger number, but with the crest of Horizon Atlantic's parent company, Aurora Systems. The letters beneath spelled her title without flourish, Chief Executive Officer. The room tilted. Conversations halted mid-breath. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to stutter. Martin stumbled forward, stammering. This has to be some kind of joke. Some elaborate hoax. Dr. Elna Park shook her head slowly. Recognition dawning. It's not a hoax. I've seen her before. Investor conferences. Profiles in the journal. She's telling the truth. The real estate magnate across the aisle murmured, "Lewis, Aurora Systems. Her software runs half the fleet in this country." His voice held awe, and just a trace of fear. Brenda whispered, her lips barely moving, "Dear God, what have I done?" Trent let out a bark of hollow laughter. "CEO, please, if she were that important, she wouldn't be sitting back here like one of us." Amara turned her eyes on him, calm and sharp. "That's the problem, Mr. Maxwell. You cannot imagine the power might choose humility. You cannot imagine the value might not need to shout. That blindness has been your downfall far longer than this flight." Trent's confidence faltered again. His voice cracked, and he looked away. For the first time, he seemed small. Amara stood slowly, stretching her frame, her braids falling over one shoulder like a crown woven from patience and steel. She did not raise her voice, but every ear in the cabin strained toward her. "For years, I've built systems designed to eliminate catastrophic variables, engines, avionics, data flows. But today, I saw the most dangerous variable of all human bias festering in my own company. That is why every flight west of Denver is frozen right now. Not to punish you, to protect the integrity of every passenger who trusts us with their lives." Martin took a stumbling step forward, his hands lifted in a pleading gesture. "Dr. Lewis, please, we didn't know. If we had known who you were." Amara raised one hand, silencing him, and that is the tragedy. "You should not have to know who I am to treat me with respect." The words landed like thunder. The law student blinked rapidly, her throat tightening as she realized she was witnessing history in motion. Amara turned back to her seat, collected her book, and settled once again with the calm of someone entirely at ease. She did not need to shout further. The unmasking was complete. But beneath her serene expression, a storm of thought whirled. She hated that she had to reveal herself this way. She had wanted to remain unseen, to measure her company from the ground up. She had wanted to rest. And yet the arrogance of one passenger, the compliance of a gate manager, the bias of a crew member had forced her hand. She felt both righteous and weary, as though each word cost her more than the crowd would ever know. The law student whispered, almost reverently, "She grounded them all. For us." "Dr." Park leaned across the aisle, meeting Amara's gaze. "You've given us more than a flight. You've given us a lesson." Amara closed her eyes briefly, exhaling. She did not need gratitude. She needed change. The silence that followed was different now, not heavy with confusion, but charged with a fragile new respect. Passengers shifted uneasily, aware they had witnessed something they would retell for years. And outside, on runways stretching across the west coast, the grounded fleet shimmered under the sun, each aircraft a testament to one woman's refusal to be erased. The engines outside remained silent, their power harnessed but unused, as if even the machines were waiting for permission to move. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere thickened. The passengers, once restless with impatience, were now still, their attention locked on Dr. Amara Lewis. Her reveal had landed like an earthquake, shaking assumptions down to their foundations. Brenda Collins stood frozen by the galley, the tablet still glowing in her hands, unread notifications piling up as her chest heaved. Martin Hale shifted his weight from foot to foot. Every drop of his authority evaporated, leaving only the nervous shuffle of a man who had lost the script. And Trent Maxwell. He wasn't used to silence. He thrived on spectacle, on noise, on dominating the air around him. But now, confronted by the calm authority of the woman he had mocked, his bluster faltered. He searched for words that would restore his sense of control, and when he finally found them, they spilled out sharp and venomous. "This is insanity," he snapped, his voice cracking slightly. "You don't get to hijack a plane because your ego got bruised. CEO or not, you're disrupting the lives of everyone here. Do you think that makes you noble? It makes you reckless. It makes you dangerous." Some passengers frowned at him. Others turned away. But Amara's eyes never wavered. She studied him with a quiet curiosity, as though dissecting his panic under glass. "My ego," she said evenly, "is not what grounded this fleet. A system infected with arrogance did that. A culture that mistakes volume for value. And you, Mr. Maxwell, are its loudest symptom." Trent bristled, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You can't destroy my career over a seat I've built relationships. I've invested millions. People depend on me. Doctor," Elena Park leaned forward, her voice cold and precise. "Children depend on me, too. The difference is, if I fail, a life is lost. If you fail, a deal falls through and someone misses a party. The math is not on your side." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. The law student in 2B tilted her phone discreetly, ensuring the moment was captured. Her live stream ticked upward in viewers, each second bringing more eyes into the tense chamber at 35,000 feet. Amara inhaled slowly, then looked toward Brenda, who still stood trembling. "Miss Collins," she said, voice gentle now, "I want you to answer me honestly. Why did you approach me first? Why not Mr. Maxwell? Why not Dr. Park? Why not anyone else in this cabin?" Brenda's lips parted, but no sound came. Her hands tightened around the tablet until her knuckles blanched. "I thought," she stammered, "I thought you seemed cooperative, quiet, less likely to cause a scene. You thought I was less." Amara finished softly. Brenda lowered her head, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. Yes. The truth hung heavy in the air. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded grimly, recognizing the pattern they had seen in other places, other moments. Amara's voice hardened. "This is not about one mistake. Brenda, this is about a culture that made you believe that assumption was safe, that you could gamble on the dignity of a woman who looked ordinary, that you could strip me of my seat, my time, my humanity, and call it policy." Brenda let the tablet drop to her side. Her shoulders trembled. "I didn't mean to. Meaning does not erase impact," Amara cut in. "You will have time to reflect. But right now, understand this. Your choice became the moment that revealed a disease in this company." Martin Hale stepped forward, desperate to reclaim control. "Dr. Lewis, please, let's be reasonable. The company can handle this internally. Let's not escalate any further. These passengers are innocent in all this." Amara turned her gaze on him, sharp as a blade. "You think this is escalation? This is accountability. For too long, your definition of reasonable has been protecting arrogance at the expense of dignity. That ends today." The real estate magnate across the aisle, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was low, measured, but heavy with authority. "Mr. Hale, do you realize the gravity of what's happening? If Dr. Lewis says the system is diseased, she has the power to replace you before the wheels leave this runway." Martin swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly. Trent scoffed, desperation turning to mockery. "So what? You're all just going to let her play dictator while one woman halts dozens of flights because her feelings got hurt." The law student in 2B spoke for the first time, her voice trembling but clear. "Her actions already changed how I see this airline. This isn't about feelings. It's about fairness. And I think you're scared because fairness terrifies you." The cabin erupted with hushed agreement, voices rising and then settling like waves against the shore. Amara leaned back, her calm returning like the tide. "Mr. Maxwell, you mistake my patience for weakness. But make no mistake, the decisions I make in the next hour will shape not only your evening, but your future. Choose your words carefully. For the first time, Trent fell silent. Amara turned her focus back to the cabin at large. You were promised a journey, a seat purchased with money, time, trust. And that promise was endangered by those who could not see beyond appearances. My responsibility is not to protect their comfort. My responsibility is to protect yours. A passenger near the rear, a woman with salt and pepper hair and a quiet strength, called out. Then what happens now? Amara considered. Her fingers brushed the cover of her book, grounding her in the rhythm of thought. She hated that it had come to this. She wanted peace, not spectacle, but every fiber of her being told her this was the moment to rewrite the script. What happens now, she said slowly, is that this flight does not depart until I am certain Horizon Atlantic has remembered who it serves. That begins with transparency. You will all know the truth of what has unfolded here, and you will carry it beyond this cabin, into the world that must change. Her phone vibrated softly in her handbag. She retrieved it with calm precision, answering without breaking eye contact with Martin Hale. Ethan, she said into the receiver, her voice steady. Yes. Initiate the audit. Begin with Los Angeles operations. Every staff file. Every protocol. I want names by morning. Martin's knees nearly buckled. His lips formed the start of a protest, but the sound withered before it left his throat. Trent whispered harshly to Chloe. She's bluffing. She has to be. But Chloe only shook her head slowly. She doesn't look like a woman who bluffs. The passengers sat straighter, a collective awareness dawning. They were no longer simply passengers trapped on a grounded aircraft. They were witnesses. They were participants in a reckoning unfolding in real time. And Amara Lewis, once underestimated as an ordinary woman with a paperback, now stood revealed as the architect of a new order. Her heart ached beneath her calm exterior. She had not wanted to humiliate Brenda. She had not wanted to crush Martin. She had not wanted to strip Trent of his illusions. But she knew what power demanded. Power without accountability was tyranny. Power wielded for dignity was justice. She folded her hands again in her lap. This flight, she said, her voice soft but final, will not move forward until the lesson is clear. No passenger is expendable, no voice is disposable, and no one, no matter how loud, will ever again be allowed to decide whose humanity matters more. The silence that followed was reverent, almost holy. Even Trent, who could never resist the last word, remained quiet. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting the tarmac in molten orange. And inside, the cabin of Flight 227 became something more than a vessel of travel. It became a courtroom, a classroom, a crucible. The breaking point had arrived. The cabin had settled into a silence so dense it felt alive. Even the low hiss of the air vents seemed to fade beneath the weight of what had just been revealed. Outside, the aircraft sat motionless, a silent giant on the taxiway, while inside, every passenger wrestled with the knowledge that their journey had become something larger than a flight. Amara Lewis sat composed, her book still resting on the tray table like an anchor. She had not raised her voice, yet the balance of power had shifted entirely. The cabin no longer belonged to Trent Maxwell or Martin Hale. It belonged to her. Her phone vibrated again, and she answered with the same unhurried grace as before. Ethan Joe's voice was steady, though she could hear the intensity beneath his control. Amara, the freeze is complete. 112 flights are grounded. Operations control is already in crisis mode. Media is asking questions. Amara's gaze drifted toward the window, watching the late sun glint across the wings. Good, she said. Then they're paying attention. Keep the freeze in place. Begin the review of Los Angeles and Seattle hubs. I want every report of bias, every unresolved complaint, surfaced immediately. And Ethan, she paused. Notify the board. Tell them this isn't a disruption. It's a correction. She ended the call and placed the phone on the table again. Around her, passengers whispered in shock. The law student in 2B stared openly, her live stream running, the viewer count climbing higher every second. She mouthed the numbers silently, tens of thousands now. Soon, hundreds of thousands. Martin Hale's face was ashen. He knew the recordings were already beyond his control. He had built his career on smoothing problems quietly, burying complaints before they grew legs. But now the problem had wings, carried by live streams and headlines that would frame him as the symbol of everything wrong with the airline. He tried one last time. Dr. Lewis, he said, his voice brittle. Please, think about the scale of what you're doing. Thousands of passengers stranded, business travelers missing meetings, families delayed. The costs are astronomical. Amara's eyes turned to him, calm but piercing. And how many passengers have been quietly humiliated, dismissed, or discarded under your watch? How many lives have been disrupted by arrogance disguised as efficiency? You are only frightened now because the cost is no longer hidden. I will not apologize for making the invisible visible. Brenda Collins, still clutching her tablet, looked down at the floor. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. She's right. We've been trained to see loudness as value, to see quiet as weakness. We measure the wrong things. Trent Maxwell exploded, unable to hold his tongue any longer. This is outrageous. You're holding us hostage for your little social experiment. You think grounding an airline makes you some kind of hero? You're just proving you're unstable. Chloe Rivera flinched at his words, her patience with him unraveling. Trent, stop. You sound desperate. Look around. Nobody believes you anymore. He turned on her, his voice sharp with betrayal. You're supposed to back me up. Chloe shook her head, her eyes locking on Amara instead. I backed arrogance too many times. Not this one. The humiliation washed over Trent like a second skin. His watch caught the fading light, but for the first time, it looked like cheap costume jewelry rather than a badge of wealth. Amara's attention shifted back to the passengers. I understand you are anxious. You expected to be airborne by now, on your way to meetings, reunions, commitments. But what happens here matters far beyond this flight. We are rewriting the culture of how people are treated when they entrust their time, their money, their safety to us. If we don't do it now, then when her words resonated. A man in row 4 nodded firmly, his voice steady. She's right. I've flown for 30 years, and I've seen it again and again. The quiet ones pushed aside, the loud ones rewarded. Maybe it takes something this disruptive to finally change it. The cabin hummed with agreement, not unanimous, but enough to shift the tide. Amara's phone buzzed once more. She answered quickly. Ethan's voice was tighter this time. The story is already breaking. A passenger stream is trending globally. Hashtags attached to your name and Horizon Atlantic are climbing into the top 10. Reporters are swarming the control centers. Some board members are alarmed, but most are waiting for your official statement. Amara closed her eyes briefly, weighing the cost. She had wanted anonymity. She had wanted a quiet trip across the country, but she knew there was no turning back now. Prepare a statement, she said. Not polished, not sanitized. The truth. Tell them exactly what happened on this aircraft, row by row. And make sure the first sentence is, "This dignity is not negotiable." She ended the call, then turned her eyes toward Brenda. "Ms. Collins, gather your crew. Tell them to stay seated. There will be no removals, no escalations, no security theatrics. Not one passenger on this plane will be touched. Do you understand?" Brenda swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, Dr. Lewis." For the first time, Amara's gaze softened slightly. "You made a mistake. Learn from it. Growth only begins when truth is faced." Tears pooled in Brenda's eyes. She nodded again, her voice breaking. "I will." Trent leaned forward suddenly, his voice dripping with desperation. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to me? Do you know how much influence I have? One phone call, and I could Amara cut him off." Her voice so calm it silenced him. Mid-sentence. "Mr. Maxwell, the most dangerous illusion a man can cling to is that influence can replace character. When history looks back on this moment, it won't remember your deals or your watch. It will remember that you stood against dignity and lost." The passengers around him murmured in agreement. He sank back into his seat, eyes darting, searching for someone to rescue him from the truth. No one moved. Even Chloe stared out the window, distancing herself from his shadow. The young law student in 2B leaned toward Amara, whispering, "They're watching everywhere now. My friends keep messaging. They can't believe this is happening live." Amara gave her a small, weary smile. Let them watch. Change only happens when the world is forced to see. As if on cue, the intercom crackled again. The captain's voice, more subdued now, filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've received instructions from ground control to remain on hold. I've been informed that this is not due to weather or traffic. This is a matter of company operations. I ask for your patience as we await further direction." The words confirmed what everyone already knew: this was no ordinary delay. Amara exhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. She knew the storm outside was only beginning. Executives would be scrambling. Investors would be calling. Politicians might soon weigh in. But in this cabin, in this suspended moment of stillness, she had drawn a line that could not be erased. Her father's words echoed in her mind again. "People will measure you with their eyes. Let them. Their rulers are broken." She looked around at the passengers, at Brenda's trembling figure, at Martin's defeated stance, at Trent's hollow bravado. And she thought of the millions who would see this moment, who would whisper to themselves that maybe dignity was not such a fragile thing after all. The aircraft remained grounded, but the culture of an airline was already beginning to rise. The minutes ticked by in heavy silence, broken only by the occasional ping of a phone or the rustle of clothing as passengers shifted in their seats. Outside the oval windows, the world carried on as if nothing extraordinary was happening. But inside the cabin of Horizon Atlantic Flight 417, a revolution was underway. Dr. Amara Lewis sat calmly in her seat, the paperback still on the tray as though nothing in her posture had changed. Yet everyone knew the center of gravity had shifted entirely. Her calmness was no longer just composure. It was power itself, displayed not with volume, but with certainty. The law student in 2B whispered to her phone again, her voice trembling with awe. "She just shut down an airline. You guys don't understand, she's actually doing it." The chat on her stream erupted, comments flooding faster than she could read them. A man from row 4 leaned forward, his deep voice carrying easily. "Ma'am, if I may, thank you. I've flown more than 1,000 times in my career, and I've seen too many people treated like they don't belong. If someone like you doesn't stand up, nothing ever changes." Amara acknowledged him with a small nod, but her face remained thoughtful. Inside, she felt the weight of contradiction pressing on her. She had wanted quiet, a rare moment to herself, a journey not defined by her title. Instead, the very anonymity she craved had revealed the cracks in the system she built. Was this fate's way of reminding her that leadership is never something one can set aside? Or was it punishment for thinking she could ever step away? Her phone vibrated again. She picked it up, already knowing who it would be. Ethan Joe's voice came through sharp but controlled. "Amara, the board is in emergency session. Some members are furious. Investors are panicking. But others are impressed. They say your decisive action might protect the company long term. You need to know, though, the press is outside the terminal. Cameras everywhere. The world wants a face." Amara closed her eyes briefly. She imagined the headlines forming, the questions loaded with both admiration and accusation. Would they call her reckless or principled tyrant or reformer? Perhaps both. Perhaps truth required embracing both. "Keep the freeze in place," she said finally, "and prepare for a press call. But not yet. First, we finish here." When she placed the phone back down, Martin Hale took a tentative step forward. His earlier bravado had crumbled. Now his hands trembled as he tried to salvage something from the wreckage. "Dr. Lewis, please, I didn't know it was you." If I had realized, Amara lifted her gaze, cutting him off with silence more powerful than words. At last she spoke. "That is exactly the problem, Mr. Hale. Service, dignity, fairness. None of these should depend on whether or not you know someone's name. If your policies only work for the powerful, they are not policies. They are excuses." Her words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. Brenda Collins, her tablet slack in her hands, wiped her eyes discreetly. Chloe Rivera lowered her gaze, shame flickering across her features as she distanced herself from Trent's arrogance. But Trent Maxwell would not relent. He leaned forward in his seat, voice dripping venom. "Do you really think people will praise you for this? You've humiliated everyone here. You've stranded hundreds of travelers. You've tanked your own stock. And you think that makes you some kind of hero." Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, but a woman in the back row finally snapped. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the cabin. "She didn't humiliate us. You did. You started this by treating her like she was disposable. You wanted the world to revolve around you, Mr. Maxwell, and now you're shocked that it doesn't." Applause followed, not loud, but firm, like the beginning of a storm. Trent's face flushed scarlet, his hands gripping the armrests as though the leather could keep him from unraveling. Amara remained quiet, letting the words of others defend her. Leadership, she knew, was not about dominating every silence. Sometimes it was about creating the space for truth to rise. Yet inside, she felt the old ache stir. She remembered the first time she had been told she did not belong in a graduate seminar where a professor questioned whether she was in the right room, assuming she had wandered in by mistake. She remembered the sting of being told to wait, to prove herself, to shrink until she could be tolerated. And now, decades later, she sat in a first-class cabin being told the same story with different words. The ache had never left. It had only hardened into resolve. The intercom crackled again. The captain's voice was more strained now. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received confirmation. The flight has been canceled. Please remain seated until we receive further instructions for disembarkation. A collective groan rose through the cabin. Phones lit up instantly as passengers texted, called, and scrolled through notifications. News alerts buzzed. Hashtags spread. The story was everywhere now. Trent jumped to his feet, ignoring the seatbelt sign. You see, this is chaos. This is disaster. And it's all because she wanted to make a point. He pointed a shaking finger at Amara. You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it. Before he could continue, Chloe Rivera rose beside him. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. No, Trent. The only one who should regret anything is you. You dragged me into this circus. You humiliated me along with everyone else. I won't stand by you anymore. Gas echoed through the cabin. Trent's mouth opened, but no words came out. Chloe's quiet defection was more devastating than any of Amara's calm rebuttals. Amara finally spoke, her voice soft but carrying. The truth always reveals itself, whether we invite it or not. Today, it revealed you, Mr. Maxwell, and it revealed this airline. The difference is, one of you can change. Passengers exchanged looks, many nodding. The narrative had crystallized. Brenda stepped forward suddenly, addressing the passengers with a trembling voice. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the crew, I apologize. What you experienced today was not service. It was failure. Dr. Lewis has shown us what accountability looks like, and I will do everything in my power to make sure we do better. Tears glistened in her eyes, but no one mocked her. Instead, several passengers murmured support, their empathy softening what could have been a final humiliation into the beginning of redemption. Amara watched quietly, her thoughts heavy. She could see the ripple beginning the shift from outrage to reflection, yet she also knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow, headlines would scorch her. Analysts would question her judgment. Shareholders would rage. But beyond the noise, the seed of change had been planted. Her phone buzzed once more. Ethan again. Amara, the press is requesting you directly. CNN, BBC, every major outlet. They want a statement before you even leave the plane. She took a slow breath, looking around at the weary but watchful faces. She thought of her father's words, of every time she had been underestimated, of every time silence had been demanded of her. Not this time. Tell them I'll speak, she said, but not from a boardroom, not from an office. I'll speak here, from this cabin, with these passengers beside me. Let the world see exactly where dignity begins. As she placed the phone down, the cabin seemed to inhale collectively, bracing for what was to come. Amara Lewis had grounded an airline, but more than that, she had grounded the illusions of power built on arrogance and bias. The storm outside the plane was waiting, but for now, the passengers of Flight 417 knew they were witnessing history in motion. The cabin felt like a theater moments before the curtain rose. Phones glowed in nearly every row, live streams capturing fragments of the scene, while whispers darted like sparks across the silence. The canceled flight had already become more than an inconvenience. It had become a stage. Amara Lewis adjusted her seat slightly, lifting her phone again. Her reflection in the black screen showed eyes both weary and steady, the dual weight of exhaustion and resolve. When Ethan Joe's voice returned through the line, it carried the urgency of a man standing in the center of a storm. Amara, every network is lined up. They know you're on board. They're waiting for you. If you're ready, I'll patch you through. She glanced around the cabin. The law student in 2B clutched her phone like a talisman. Her stream counter already passed 100,000 viewers. Doctor. Elena Park had folded her arms, watching with sharp, calm eyes. Brenda Collins stood near the galley, pale but listening intently, as if waiting for instruction that might decide the course of her future. And Trent Maxwell, red-faced and restless, seethed silently, powerless for the first time in his life. Amara spoke softly into the receiver. "Ethan, connect me, but make it clear. I'm not speaking from a studio or a polished stage. I'm speaking here, among passengers, on the very plane where this began." Seconds later, a tone signaled the connection. A voice, professional and hurried, came through. "Dr. Lewis, this is CNN Live. We're broadcasting now. Please, go ahead." Amara held the phone upright, the camera catching her face framed by the muted glow of the cabin. She didn't change her posture, didn't force a smile. She let the truth speak plainly. "My name is Dr. Amara Lewis. I am the CEO of Aurora Systems, the parent company of Horizon Atlantic Airlines. Right now, I am seated in 2A of Flight 417, which has been canceled because of what unfolded here tonight, and the world deserves to know why." The cabin stilled. Passengers leaned in, listening as though history were unfolding not in front of them, but through them. This evening, I was asked to give up my confirmed seat so that a louder passenger could take it. The crew assumed I would be compliant, that I would not resist. They judge me not by my ticket, not by the truth, but by their perception of who belongs and who does not. This was not an accident. It was the reflection of a deeper culture, one that rewards arrogance and punishes quiet dignity. Her voice carried no anger, only clarity. Cameras from passengers captured every word. Streams multiplied, stitched across platforms. Her message spreading faster than any press release could have managed. I did not reveal my position immediately, because I wanted to see how far the assumptions would go. I wanted to see how easily dignity could be stripped away. And when the truth became undeniable, I made a choice. I froze this airline's operations, not to inconvenience travelers, but to hold a mirror to the system itself. Gas whispered through the cabin. Passengers sat straighter, realizing they were now part of something that would be replayed on screens around the world. Every person on this plane, every person who flies, deserves respect, not because of their wealth, their title, or their volume, but because they are human beings. That principle is not negotiable. Tonight, it was violated. Tonight, it was exposed. And from tonight forward, it will be redefined. Brenda's lips trembled as she whispered to a colleague. "She's rewriting the whole airline from this seat," Amara continued, her voice steady as the engines outside. "I know there are passengers stranded in airports right now, frustrated, angry, confused. To them, I say this: your inconvenience today is an investment in the future of fair travel. No company can call itself safe if it allows dignity to be compromised. No airline can claim excellence if it permits bias to decide who belongs. And as of tonight, Horizon Atlantic will no longer permit it." Her words settled into the air with a weight no turbulence could shake. Passengers shifted, some wiping tears, others nodding silently. "Doctor," Park leaned toward the aisle, speaking loud enough for those nearby. "She's not just saving this airline, she's saving all of us." Amara looked directly into the phone, her eyes steady. "There will be consequences for those who made choices tonight, for those who enabled them, for those who looked away. But there will also be growth. This is not about punishment. It is about transformation. And I promise you that transformation begins here in row 2 of Flight 417. She lowered the phone slightly, signaling the end. The connection clicked, but the cabin remained silent, breathless. The law student's live stream counter surged past 200,000. Her hands shook as she whispered, "They all heard her. The whole world just heard her." Trent Maxwell leapt to his feet, unable to restrain his fury. "This is a sham. You're making yourself a martyr while thousands of people suffer because of you. You're not a hero. You're a tyrant." His words bounced against the cabin walls, but they no longer carried weight. Passengers turned away, unimpressed. Chloe Rivera's voice was quiet but firm. "No, Trent, she's a leader, and you just showed everyone exactly what you're not." His shoulders sagged, his anger sputtering like a dying flame. For the first time, he looked small, not because Amara diminished him, but because the truth finally revealed what had been there all along. Martin Hale stepped forward, his voice strained. "Dr. Lewis, what happens now? To the crew? To me?" To all of this, Amara regarded him calmly. "What happens now is accountability. You will answer for your choices, but accountability is not the end. It is the beginning. Whether this destroys you or transforms you will depend on how you face the truth." Brenda Collins, tears streaming down her face, spoke suddenly. "I want to learn. I don't want to be the kind of person who makes someone feel less. Please, let me do better." Amara inclined her head. "Then you've already taken the first step. Growth begins with recognition." The passengers around them nodded. The shift was palpable. What began as humiliation had become reckoning, and now, perhaps, redemption. Amara leaned back once more, exhaustion visible at the corners of her eyes. She had not sought this moment, but she would carry it. Because leadership was not about choosing when the spotlight found you. It was about choosing what to do when it did. The cabin exhaled as one. The storm outside was only beginning media headlines. Investor fury, regulatory scrutiny. But inside Flight 417, something remarkable had taken root. A woman who had been asked to give up her seat had instead claimed the sky. The jet bridge rattled against the aircraft door with a dull metallic clang. For a moment, the cabin was suspended in silence. That strange quiet after lightning when everyone waits to hear if thunder will follow. Then the door hissed open, and the sound of voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, rushed in like a tide. Passengers craned their necks. Through the narrow doorway, flashes of camera bulbs and the sharp crackle of reporters' voices could be heard echoing down the terminal. The world had arrived. Captain Ruiz stepped into the cabin, his face pale but composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have returned to the gate. Security will escort you out row by row. Please remain calm." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed unease. He knew this was no ordinary disembarkation. Amara Lewis sat still, her phone resting on her lap. She could hear the journalists shouting questions already, their words indistinct but urgent. Around her, passengers whispered nervously, torn between curiosity and dread. Some checked their phones, others adjusted jackets and bags, but all of them knew this night was no longer private. "Doctor?" Elena Park leaned toward Amara. "They're waiting for you. Every camera out there is pointed at this gate." Amara's fingers brushed the worn spine of the paper back she had carried on board. The novel had been her shield at the beginning, a way to disappear into anonymity. Now, anonymity was gone. She closed the book and placed it gently in her handbag, a small act of acceptance. Brenda Collins lingered near the galley, wringing her hands. She looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't summon the courage. Amara caught her eye, offered a single nod of acknowledgement. Brenda blinked back tears, as if the gesture alone was a lifeline. Row by row, passengers filed out, their faces lit by the flashing bulbs beyond. The law student in 2B kept her stream live, narrating in hushed tones. We're walking straight into a wall of cameras. This is surreal. They're calling her name. They know exactly who she is. When it was Amara's turn, she arose slowly, adjusting the strap of her bag across her shoulder. Trent Maxwell, still red with humiliation, tried to dart past her in the aisle, but a security officer stepped forward. "Sir, wait your turn." The rebuke landed like a slap, and for once, Trent had no comeback. Amara stepped into the jet bridge. The air was hot with lights, microphones thrust forward like spears. Reporters shouted over each other. "Dr. Lewis, why did you cancel the entire schedule? Is it true you grounded every flight in the region? Was this retaliation or corporate negligence?" She kept walking, her pace calm, her posture unshaken. The cameras followed like predators scenting blood, but Amara refused to look rattled. When she reached the wide space of the terminal concourse, the true scale of the chaos became clear. Dozens of journalists crowded against a cordon of airport police. Travelers stopped mid-stride to record, their faces bathed in the glow of their screens. Ethan Joe's voice buzzed in her ear through the discreet earpiece she now wore. "Amara, we can get you through a side exit." "Security's ready." "No," she murmured back. "Not yet. They deserve to hear it straight." She stepped up onto the edge of a low barrier, elevating herself just enough to be seen. The crowd hushed, microphones raised, lenses focused. The terminal, usually a place of rushing feet and rolling suitcases, became a theater. Amara's voice cut through the chaos, firm and unhurried. "Yes. I grounded the flights. Yes. I canceled the schedule. And I did it because tonight revealed a failure far greater than an inconvenience." Reporters leaned forward, scribbling notes furiously. A paying customer was asked to surrender her seat because she appeared less important than another. That decision was not a mistake. It was the result of a culture that rewards noise over dignity, flash over substance, arrogance over truth. That culture ends tonight. The murmurs swelled, cameras flashing like starlight. Some of you will call this reckless. Some of you will say it cost millions. And you are correct. It did. But leadership is not about avoiding cost. It is about deciding which cost is worth paying. And dignity, fairness, and safety are worth more than a balance sheet, the law student whispered into her live stream, her voice breaking with awe. "She's rewriting history in the middle of Terminal C." Trent Maxwell shoved through the crowd, his voice desperate. "She's lying. She's doing this for attention. I'm the victim here." The crowd turned, but instead of sympathy, only scorn met him. A businessman barked back, "You embarrassed all of us tonight." A woman with a stroller shook her head. "You made us late because you couldn't wait your turn." The tide of opinion had turned fully, and Trent stood drowning in it. Amara ignored him, her gaze fixed on the cameras. "To the passengers stranded tonight, I apologize. To the families disrupted, I apologize. But to every traveler who has ever been told they don't belong, who has ever been diminished by someone's snap judgment, I say this: your dignity is not negotiable. Not anymore." The words hit the room like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. A man near the back lowered his phone slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to respect, a reporter muttered, almost to herself. This is bigger than a flight. This is systemic. Security moved closer, but Amara lifted a hand. One more thing. The crowd quieted instantly. This company will not brush this aside. Every protocol will be reviewed. Every staff member retrained. A new code will be written. No confirmed passenger is ever to be removed against their will for the convenience of another. Loyalty will be measured by character, not volume. And this code will be enforced not as a slogan, but as law. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling. Even some of the reporters clapped, caught up in the rare sight of accountability spoken without spin. Only when the noise began to crest did Amara step down from the barrier. Security closed in around her, guiding her toward a waiting corridor. As they walked, Brenda Collins hurried forward. "Dr. Lewis?" she called, breathless. Amara paused. Brenda's voice shook. I know I failed tonight, but I don't want to stay that person. Please, give me the chance to change." For a long moment, Amara studied her, eyes unreadable. Then she spoke quietly. "Change isn't given. Brenda, it's chosen. Show me who you choose to be." Brenda swallowed hard, nodding, tears streaking her cheeks. Amara turned away, her expression softening just slightly. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was possibility. The corridor door swung shut behind her, muffling the storm of the terminal. Inside the quieter passage, Ethan's voice returned in her ear. "That was live on every major outlet. Investors are calling already. Some furious, some impressed." Amara let out a slow breath, her composure intact, but her body heavy with fatigue. "Let them call. We'll answer in the boardroom." And for the first time that night, she allowed herself to close her eyes as she walked, feeling the weight of both the storm she had unleashed and the clarity it had revealed. This was no longer just about a flight. It was about a new compass for an entire industry. The boardroom lights were too bright, as if someone had tried to erase the fatigue from the faces around the long mahogany table. Screens glowed with ticker symbols, graphs plunging downward in red, headlines scrolling across news feeds that blared words like crisis, upheaval, and CEO rebellion. Amara Lewis sat at the head of the table, her back straight, her hands folded neatly on the polished surface. She wore no armor except composure. Across from her, 10 board members shuffled papers, adjusted glasses, cleared throats. They were accustomed to controlling narratives. Tonight, the narrative controlled them. Ethan Joe sat at her right, quiet but alert, his laptop open, a stream of data flowing across the screen. Every new headline was another brick in the wall closing in on the old way of doing business. Chairman Harold Whitfield finally broke the silence. His voice was brittle, full of frustration he could not hide. "Amara, what you did last night cost this company millions, tens of millions. Do you realize the chaos you unleashed? Investors are furious. Regulators are calling. Stockholders are demanding answers." Amara's gaze did not flinch. "Yes, Harold, I realize it. And I also realize that what I did last night might have saved this company from collapse in the long term." A woman 2 seats down leaned forward, her silver hair catching the light. Director Evelyn Chambers tapped a manicured finger on the table. "You grounded a fleet. You humiliated your own staff in front of the world. You bypassed protocol. That is not leadership. That is anarchy." Amara's voice was calm, deliberate. "No, that was accountability. And accountability always feels like anarchy to those who have lived too long without it." The words cut through the air like glass breaking. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Harold's jaw tightened. Don't lecture us. Amara, we built this airline. We know what it takes to keep it afloat. Amara leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp. And yet under your watch, an airline that promises safety and dignity allowed a paying customer to be told she didn't belong. Do you know what that means in real terms? It means lawsuits. It means boycotts. It means your brand becomes synonymous with arrogance and bias. That is not keeping the company afloat. That is sinking it slowly while you look the other way. Ethan spoke for the first time, his voice steady. She's right. The social media metrics are undeniable. 92% of trending commentary supports her decision. Consumers are rallying behind this. Investors are shaken now. But if we position ourselves as the airline that chooses dignity, market value will recover, stronger than before. The room buzzed with murmurs. The board was not united, but cracks were forming. Evelyn Chambers shook her head sharply. And what of precedent? What happens the next time a customer makes a scene? Do we ground the fleet for every grievance? Amara's voice softened, though her eyes remained unyielding. This was not a grievance. This was a revelation. The culture of this company was exposed in front of the world. The choice was clear: protect the illusion of order, or protect the truth. I chose the truth. Harold slammed his hand against the table. At what cost? Amara let silence hang for a long moment before answering. At the cost of a single night's disruption, in exchange for a future where every traveler knows they will be treated with dignity, no matter what they look like, no matter how quietly they sit. That is a cost I am willing to pay. The room hushed. Even Harold's anger faltered under the weight of her conviction. Director Samuel Patel, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. Amara, what exactly do you propose? What concrete steps? Amara straightened. She had rehearsed this in her mind since the moment she chose to reveal herself on the plane. First, a complete audit of all discrimination complaints across the company. Every hub, every station, nothing buried. Second, a binding code: no confirmed passenger will be removed for another's convenience. Third, mandatory bias and dignity training for all frontline staff, designed not by contractors but by those who have lived these realities. Fourth, a transparent reporting system that bypasses middle management and goes directly to executive review. Fifth, and perhaps most important, a public acknowledgement. We admit what happened, we apologize, and we promise change. The board murmured, some impressed, others scandalized. Harold leaned back, his eyes narrowing. You're asking us to put our dirty laundry on display. That will kill investor confidence. Amara shook her head. No, Harold. Hiding the truth is what kills confidence. Owning it is what restores it. Evelyn Chambers interjected again, her voice sharp. And the employees who failed last night. What of them? Amara paused, choosing her words carefully. They will face consequences, but I will not scapegoat them for the sake of optics. Their mistakes were shaped by a system we allowed to flourish. We will hold individuals accountable. Yes. But we will also reform the system that taught them arrogance was acceptable. Her eyes flicked to Ethan. He nodded, then projected a slide onto the screen behind her. It showed trending data, public sentiment graphs, comments flooding in from passengers across the world. Ethan explained. In the last 12 hours, the phrase dignity is not negotiable has been shared over 8 million times. That is the strongest brand message we have had in a decade. This is not a liability. This is an opportunity. Silence fell. The graphs glowed red and green, lines rising and falling. But all eyes were on Amara. Harold finally spoke, his voice lower now. And if we refuse, if we decide your actions were too reckless, if we vote to remove you. Amara leaned back, folding her hands again. Her calm was unnerving. Then you will remove the woman who controls 72% of Aurora Systems' voting shares. The woman who holds the patents that keep this fleet in the air. The woman the public already trusts more than they trust you. Remove me, and you remove the only lifeline this company has left. The room froze. The weight of her power was undeniable, and for the first time, Harold had no retort. Amara's voice softened, almost tender now. But that is not what I want. I don't want to destroy this airline. I want to save it. Not for investors, not for shareholders, for the millions who board these planes every day, trusting us with their lives. If that trust is broken, nothing else matters. Evelyn's lips pressed thin, but she said nothing. Harold looked down at the papers before him, the red graphs bleeding across the page. One by one, other board members lowered their eyes too, the fight draining from them. It was Samuel Patel who finally nodded. I support her plan. Evelyn scowled, but a second voice followed, then a third. Within minutes, the momentum shifted. The majority tilted toward Amara. Harold sat rigid, but even he could see the tide had turned. Amara rose slowly, her chair sliding back. Then it begins now. I will address the public tonight. We will not hide. We will not deny. We will lead. As she left the boardroom, Ethan followed close behind. You won, Amara, but the storm is just beginning. Amara's eyes were tired, but her voice was steady. I didn't come here to escape storms. Ethan, I came here to change their direction. Outside, cameras still flashed, headlines still screamed, and the market still trembled. But Amara Lewis knew that for the first time in years, the future of Horizon Atlantic had shifted not toward collapse, but toward truth. Morning sunlight spilled across the glass facade of Horizon Atlantic's headquarters, but the brightness could not disguise the storm brewing inside and out. Overnight, the world had consumed every second of the footage from Flight 417. Amara's words, her calm composure, and her final declaration dignity is not negotiable had been clipped, shared, remixed, and broadcast across every platform. In airports from New York to Tokyo, travelers repeated the phrase as if it were scripture. News anchors dissected it. Panelists argued about it. And passengers in long security lines quoted it to strangers. Some called it the birth of a movement. Others called it reckless defiance. But no one could ignore it. Inside her office, Amara stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear. Ethan Joe paced behind her, his laptop open to streaming metrics. Amara, regulators from the Department of Transportation are demanding a briefing. The FAA has already scheduled a review of crew policies, and the Secretary of Transportation wants to speak with you personally this afternoon. Amara's voice was steady, though her eyes betrayed fatigue. Then we will meet them head-on. No spin, no excuses. She ended the call and turned to Ethan. How's public sentiment holding? He glanced at his screen. Surprisingly strong. 68% positive across demographics. Stock is still down 12%, but analysts are already speculating it might rebound once reforms are announced. The hashtag is still trending worldwide. Amara nodded faintly. She knew the numbers mattered, But what mattered more were the passengers who had watched, the staff who would soon face change, the countless unseen travelers who carried the weight of indignity every time they boarded. Across the city, Trent Maxwell sat slumped at a hotel bar, his expensive watch glinting like a cruel reminder of power slipping away. His phone buzzed with notifications, each headline more brutal than the last. Investor darling, humiliated on flight. Trent Maxwell jeered his entitled passenger. He had tried calling his partners overnight, but most avoided him. A few answered only to sever ties. His empire, built on image and bravado, was collapsing in real time. Chloe Rivera entered quietly, her face pale but resolute. She sat beside him without ordering a drink. "It's over, Trent." He turned to her, eyes bloodshot. "No, it's not. I'll sue her. I'll sue the airline." Chloe cut him off, her voice sharp. "Sue her for what? For showing the world who you really are. You humiliated yourself, and you dragged me down with you. But I won't let you anymore. I'm leaving." Her words landed harder than any headline. Trent's shoulders slumped. He reached out, but Chloe pulled back. "You should think about who you want to be when the cameras aren't rolling. Trent, for once in your life, try being someone worth respecting." She left him there, alone, his reflection in the bar mirror a stranger he could no longer command. Back at Horizon's training center, Brenda Collins sat in a small conference room, eyes swollen from a sleepless night. The walls were bare, except for a clock that ticked too loudly. She had expected to be fired by now. She had replayed her mistake 1,000 times, her voice echoing in her head. "I thought you were more compliant, less likely to cause a scene." A knock on the door pulled her from her spiral. A woman entered, not from human resources, but from Amara's new task force on dignity training. So she introduced herself as Karen Morales, a consultant who specialized in cultural accountability. Brenda braced herself, but Karen's tone was not accusatory. "Brenda, I'm here because Dr. Lewis believes accountability is not the same as destruction. She wants you to have the chance to rebuild. That begins here." Brenda's lip trembled. Why would she give me that chance? I humiliated her. Karen's eyes softened. Because she knows humiliation is a cycle, and the only way to end a cycle is to break it. You can choose to be broken, or you can choose to rebuild. Tears spilled freely down Brenda's face. For the first time in hours, a spark of something other than despair flickered inside her. By noon, Amara sat at a long table in Washington, cameras flashing as she addressed federal officials. Reporters crowded the back of the room. She spoke not as a CEO shielding a corporation, but as a leader laying bare its flaws. Our industry has excelled at building planes that fly higher, faster, safer. But we have neglected the human element. We have allowed bias to board with every ticket. We have allowed dignity to be treated as optional. That ends today. Horizon Atlantic will lead not only with technology, but with truth. We will partner with regulators to ensure that every passenger on every flight receives the respect they are owed. No exceptions. Applause erupted, not thunderous, but genuine. Even skeptical officials leaned forward, scribbling notes with interest rather than suspicion. That night, back at her office, Amara finally allowed herself to sink into her chair. Ethan handed her a tablet displaying the latest coverage. Across networks, commentators debated whether her reforms would reshape aviation permanently. Some were cynical, but most admitted something had shifted. A knock sounded at the door. Brenda entered, hesitant, holding a small envelope. Dr. Lewis, I wrote this for you. It's an apology. Not for the cameras. For you. Amara accepted it silently, placing it on her desk without opening it. She looked at Brenda with a mixture of exhaustion and quiet compassion. Words matter. Actions matter more. Show me your change, and that will be apology enough. Brenda nodded, relief mingling with determination. As the city lights glowed beyond the window, Amara finally allowed herself a moment of stillness. She thought of her father's words again, of broken rulers and the weight of perception. She thought of every time she had been told she did not belong, and how last night had transformed that refrain into something else. Now, people across the world were whispering a different phrase. Dignity is not negotiable. And for the first time in her career, Amara believed the industry was ready to listen. The weeks after the incident unfolded like ripples across a pond, each wave reaching further than Amara Lewis had imagined that night on Flight 417. At first, the noise was overwhelming. Headlines screamed. Stock tickers fluctuated wildly, and her inbox filled with both praise and vitriol. Yet beneath the chaos, something steadier began to take shape. Passengers began writing directly to Horizon Atlantic, not only to complain, but to thank. A grandmother described how a young flight attendant knelt beside her in the aisle, helping her lift her oxygen bag with respect and dignity she had never experienced before. A corporate executive, notorious for his temper, admitted he had been disarmed when a gate agent calmly but firmly refused to prioritize him over another passenger. Letters like these arrived daily, small affirmations that culture was shifting. Inside Horizon's headquarters, the reforms Amara had announced were no longer abstract promises. The dignity. First directive was codified into every operational handbook. Training rooms buzzed with scenario-based exercises, where flight attendants role-played difficult situations, learning to navigate them with empathy instead of reflexive authority. Senior executives sat alongside junior staff in workshops, breaking down the invisible walls of hierarchy. The culture of deference to volume was dying, replaced by a culture of deference to truth. Ethan Joe monitored the metrics obsessively. Complaints about discriminatory treatment fell by nearly 70% within 2 months. Passenger satisfaction scores rose. Bookings from high-value clients not only recovered, but exceeded projections. "It's working," he told Amar one late evening, a rare grin spreading across his usually measured face. "The industry thought we were reckless, but they are already copying us." Indeed, rival airlines began to quietly inquire about Horizon's new training modules. Consultants requested permission to adapt the Dignity-First model for hotels, cruise lines, and even hospitals. Amara had wanted reform for her company. Instead, she had sparked something larger, a rethinking of service itself. For Trent Maxwell, the opposite trajectory continued. His name had become shorthand for arrogance. News programs replayed his sneering comments with captions like "the entitled passenger." Financial magazines dissected his collapse, detailing debts, unpaid investors, and the hollow core of his ventures. Invitations to galas disappeared. Board seats evaporated. Even old acquaintances crossed the street to avoid him. He had built his life on noise and image, and now silence devoured him. Brenda Collins, meanwhile, was walking a different path. Under Karen Morales' guidance, she attended weekly sessions on cultural humility. She spent long nights journaling, forcing herself to write not excuses, but truths. One afternoon, she volunteered at a community shelter, serving meals to families who had lost their homes. For the first time in years, she felt what it meant to serve without calculation. Slowly, shame gave way to purpose. She met Amar again in a training seminar, Months later, Amara did not mention the past. She simply nodded at Brenda's contribution to a group exercise, an acknowledgment subtle yet profound. In that nod, Brenda understood that redemption was not about erasing mistakes, but about refusing to repeat them. Chloe Rivera had left Trent behind entirely. She returned to graduate school, her name no longer tethered to his scandals. In interviews, she spoke openly about complicity, how standing silently beside arrogance was its own kind of failure. She described the night she walked away as the moment she found her own voice. Her honesty resonated. Universities invited her to speak. Nonprofits offered her platforms. In the shadow of Trent's downfall, Chloe discovered the beginnings of her own ascent. As for Amara, the weight of leadership did not vanish. If anything, it grew heavier. But it was a weight she carried differently now, with a deeper sense of clarity. She traveled more, not for board meetings, but to visit Horizon staff in the field. At airports, she asked ground crews about their frustrations. On flights, she spoke with attendants during service breaks. She listened not as a distant executive, but as someone who understood that listening was the first form of respect. One evening, she sat again by the airplane window, the city lights of New York shimmering far below. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to remember that night, the humiliation, the confrontation, the quiet moment when she chose not to yield her seat. She remembered the fear that had flickered at the edge of her resolve and the deep calm that had carried her through. She knew she had not only defended herself, she had defended an idea that dignity was not a gift from the powerful, but a right inherent to every passenger, every human being. Her thoughts drifted to her father again. He had once told her, when she was a child wrestling with bullies at school, that the loudest voices often hide the weakest convictions. Never let someone's noise drown out your worth, he had said. That memory, so ordinary at the time, now felt like prophecy, fulfilled. The industry eventually coined a name for what had happened, the Flight 417 doctrine. Aviation journals wrote case studies about it. Business schools assigned it. Politicians referenced it in speeches about equity. Yet for Amara, it was never about doctrine or fame. It was about making sure that no passenger would ever feel what she felt when Brenda first leaned over and told her she would have to give up her seat. Months later, at an international aviation summit in Geneva, Amara stood before a room of executives, regulators, and journalists. She spoke not with flourish, but with quiet conviction. "We do not sell tickets," she said. "We sell trust, and trust requires dignity. It requires that we see each person not as a problem to be managed, but as a human being to be respected." The strength of our industry is not in the height of our planes, but in the depth of our humanity. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that lingers not from boredom, but from recognition. Then came applause, building slowly until it filled the hall. Later, as she left the stage, Ethan caught her arm. "Do you realize what you just did?" he whispered. Amara smiled faintly. "I only told the truth. The world is finally ready to hear it." That night, alone in her hotel room, Amara opened her laptop to an email from Dr. Elena Park. The subject line read, "Update on the little boy." Amara's heart skipped as she clicked. Elena's message was brief. The surgery had been a success. The child was thriving. His parents had asked Elena to convey their gratitude to the woman whose courage had ensured their doctor made it to Aspen on time. Amara closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. For all the headlines, all the boardrooms, all the speeches, it was this single story that mattered most. A child alive, a family whole, because one woman on one night refused to be erased. She leaned back, letting the weight of it settle. It was never about victory. It was about consequence. Not revenge, but responsibility. Not punishment, but possibility. She thought again of the phrase the world had embraced, the phrase that had become larger than her. Dignity is not negotiable. Amar whispered it once, softly, as if to herself, then let the silence of the night carry it forward. The story of Flight 417 would fade from headlines eventually. New scandals would erupt. New crises would demand attention. But the lesson carved into the industry that night would remain. It would live in the policies rewritten, in the employees retrained, in the quiet acts of respect exchanged between strangers 30,000 feet above the earth. And it would live in the heart of every passenger who, stepping onto a plane, no longer wondered if their worth would be questioned. Amara Lewis, calm and composed as always, had not only secured her seat, she had secured a place for dignity in the very architecture of flight. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of noise, that truth soared higher than any aircraft ever could. When the doors of Flight 417 closed, the world thought it was just another journey. Instead, it became a lesson that dignity cannot be bargained away. One woman's calm defiance exposed arrogance, forced accountability, and gave birth to reforms that will outlast headlines. But beneath the contracts and policies, this was always a human story. A story of passengers who wanted nothing more than fairness. A story of a leader who carried decades of prejudice on her shoulders and chose, in a single moment, not to bend. Let this be a reminder. Every act of disrespect leaves a scar, but every act of courage can heal more than just one life. It can heal systems. It can heal industries. It can heal us. We should honor Amara's strength, condemn the prejudice she faced, and ask ourselves, what will we do the next time we see dignity denied? Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us that respect is not a privilege, it is a right. And with that, we close this flight, but the next story is already boarding.